This panel is going to be simply about forking capitalism for the common good. And you might have noticed that there's a theme between some of the things that are being talked about here. So earlier today, Matt was talking about how all of the value that that is in a piece of land, in a piece of land property, comes from the social fabric that is created around it. Then later we were talking about how social media platforms have this sort of outsized power over our data and in shaping our lives. And we were also talking about some of the failures with approaches to technology that don't really consider the culture and the social relationships that underlie them. So one of the things that we are going to talk about in this panel is how our social relationships are the source of almost all value in the world. They are, by definition, increasing return processes, which means that the more we have them, the more value they generate. And they are upstream of economic value in global markets. We admire the achievements of individual entrepreneurs, but social relationships are also the foundation out of which they can create value. And there's a problem with how capitalism is focused on what trickles downstream, so on the consequences, on the outputs of these processes, and in doing that ends up eroding and drying up that critical source of value creation that is our social relationships. So we think that this focus on relationships will be central to new political economies, it will be central to new technologies, and, and will be central to delivering empowerment and real flourishing. So this panel is going to feature 2 examples of relational work and what that looks like. We're going to have here with us Maïmonatou Mar. She is co-founder of the first vocational organization to support and empower women working as nannies in France. And along with her mother, who is a senior nanny, Maïmonatou has built a network of more than 1,000 women who are established in establishing partnerships with major public and private stakeholders, and they work as a cooperative. Maïmonatou believes that bottom-up initiatives and cooperative models have the power to revive economic and democratic governance. She has launched the French chapter of RadicalxChange, and there she often applies everything that she's learned from her previous experience in science and technology. And then we'll also have Calum, Bowden. The 2 of you are welcome to come to the stage. And is working on stories, worlds, and platforms that reconnect the cultural with the technological, economic, political, and ecological. And he co-founded Trust and Black Swan. So I'm extremely pleased to welcome them to our stage today and to provide a glimpse, hopefully for us, of what relational work looks like. So we're going to start with short presentations of their work, and then they're going to have a conversation, and we'll be lucky to be able to listen in. So I'll hand it over to you.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Calum, and do you want to say hello? So I have some slides. Wonderful, thank you. So I collaborate on a project called Black Swan, and it's very much a collective endeavor. And so all of the things I'll talk about today are enmeshed with these people, Laura Lottie, Penny Rafferty, and Laith Ben-Keda. And Black Swan exists as an artistic research project trying to find ways of learning from peer-to-peer networking and decentralization more generally, and thinking about how we might organize art worlds differently and transfer power back to artists who are currently very much exploited within the global art market. Black Swan kind of started from a speculative proposition about what it would look like to have cultural resources distributed following a decision-making system that was entirely controlled by artists. So the initial speculation was, could we have cultural institutions stake resources like residency places, exhibition space, funding into a DAO, and could we have artists decide what they want to do with these resources? And this was kind of a response to our own experiences trying to operate as artists in an increasingly atomized art world. The increasing competition for cultural resources under neoliberalism, also emerging practices that might engage with technology and different ways of working are not really well served or even recognized as art by existing institutional structures. Further, the global art market favors individual practitioners that it's able to create markets around at the expense of the scenes and networks of collaborators that allow these practices to exist in the first place. Meanwhile, institutions, legacy institutions exist as these kind of silos that, and often it will be the same collectors on the boards of all of the institutions who are cherry picking these few artists that they're able to create markets around. And rather, we're interested in how can institutions share resources and infrastructures and tools. And yeah, artists currently have very little control over the data they produce. They have very little benefit from the value produced by their practices. And we also see the value of artistic practice in the process that it goes through in becoming an artwork. And so we're interested in finding ways of kind of foregrounding the process. There's a lot of ideas here. We were interested in blockchains back in 2017 for the potential they afforded, or like we felt it afforded, for distributing value differently through networks and allowing the users of a network to in some way benefit from the value that they create. And we were also kind of interested in how this extends beyond national boundaries, can accrue translocal value, is censorship resistant. But at the same time, we're very skeptical of the claims of the blockchain industry. Also, the onboarding is incredibly inaccessible for the vast majority of people who don't have the technical literacy or financial means to access these increasingly expensive networks. And so we wanted to use blockchain as a tool for the imagination, not relying on the technology at all, to really test our assumptions about how art worlds might be organized differently and how we might inject them with democratic decision-making around resource use. And so from this, we kind of devised a 4-part methodology that really places the core emphasis on play. And so we craft experiments to test our assumptions, and we also create role-playing games. As I was mentioning, we do blockchain thinking, so it's kind of taking learnings from technology without being beholden to it, and yeah, really emphasizing the social in anything that is technological. We're also interested in interdependence, and so kind of thinking about ways of creating solidarity amongst artists who are increasingly atomized within the existing market, and then further thinking about DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, as a catalyst for and like a modular way of building democratic organizations. And so some of the experiments that we did over the last few years looked at decision-making, modes of exchange, and ontologies of value. The first was really focusing on decision-making and governance, and we were very excited in 2019 around quadratic voting, but we were skeptical that artists would enjoy using it or that they might feel overwhelmed by it because it's pretty complicated. And so we wanted to kind of test that alongside a more standard one-person, one-vote system and a lottery where we experimented with taking agency away. And so we invited 10 interdisciplinary creative practitioners who are part of the Trust online community in Discord to take part in a 6-week experiment where we asked them to decide how to distribute a very small €300 microgrant with each of these different decision-making systems. And then we had thorough discussions at the end around how it felt and what went well. And we were really kind of surprised to find that the artists really enjoyed quadratic voting, even though they really didn't understand what was going on. And this was a kind of interesting insight for us, and I'll talk more about what we did after, but we wanted to begin prototyping ways of making quadratic voting intuitive to these communities where it feels good to have the ability to express a nuanced preference, even if you don't know exactly what is going on with the quadratic function. And we also found that quadratic voting is a really nice way of finding the most preferable compromise within the group. So actually, it was a project looking at biotechnology and thinking about, I'm not remembering all the details, but ultimately everybody kind of liked it a little bit, and everyone was very happy that it was awarded the micro grant. Then we wanted to find ways of simulating and speedrunning organizational structures and seeing what we can learn about how organizations are structured, the roles people play within them, and also how different structures might relate to each other. And so we set up a role-playing game in Berlin with 40 artists, and they were each assigned to one of 4 different organizations, based loosely on the work of a Japanese historian and philosopher called Kojin Karatani. And he revises Marxist thinking around modes of production to focus instead on modes of exchange. And so it's a relational philosophy, thinking about how organizations and how societies relate to each other. And so we took each of Karatani's different modes of exchange and based an organization on them. So we had a clan, we had a guild, we had a cult, and we had a venture. And these were all kind of communes because we were interested in reviving the long European notion of communes as neighborhood units and organizational units. We assigned the artists different roles within these different communes and asked them to decide what to do with about 15 cultural resources that were pledged by different institutions. And we've done other talks on this online, so if you're interested, blackswan.support, but I'll try and give a kind of an overview of the work that we've been doing. We also did an activity focusing on ontologies of value and wanting to expand beyond narrow and reductive market-based values, which are the kind of hegemonic reality of the contemporary art world. And so we wanted to kind of figure out what values different cultural practitioners locate within their processes and try and do mapping exercises around value more generally to think about how value is relational and emerges through process. So we've done other experiments too, often with role-playing games, trying to see how people within organizations will distribute resources, and we try and combine infrastructural development with world building, and the stories we tell about technology are very important to the work that Black Swan has been doing. And I'll kind of try and end with a bit about Signet, which is a quadratic voting tool that we have been prototyping following these experiments that we've been doing. It started more as a kind of, again, a speculation on how could we make the relationship between voice credits and effective votes intuitive and very clear to understand. So these bars are kind of showing you the power of your vote and how many votes you're getting from the voice credits you distribute. We then, over about a year and many prototypes, have a kind of working online platform that works with Discord for user management. It works with Slack also. And we've been using it with artist communities in these mini DAO experiments where cultural institutions will pledge a set of resources and then we asked artists over the course of one moon cycle to decide what to do with those resources. So first they submit a proposal, and then you can vote, and this is kind of the updated interface showing the relationship between voice credits and votes. And something that was very particular about our work is many of the resources are not fungible, so we had to find a way of allowing these discrete things like a year-long radio residency or a mentorship opportunity using quadratic voting, and so we can sort the results according to resources. And this had a really nice effect in currently artists, if you want to do a project, you have to apply for a lot of different opportunities, and you always have to apply to the institution for the opportunity. And what we've done is kind of inverse this, so the institutions have to be organized around the artists and the work that they want to do. And so the proposal links together the resources. I think this is enough for now. We can talk more after.
So, Calum has been like really giving insight about like the situation. It's not working. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Take yours. Is it better now? Okay, great. So yes, Calum has been really like introducing like the insight about artists. I come from a different perspective, talking about care. Care workers are really like those workers who evolve in the houses of families to provide services. And it has like deep roots, unfortunately, in domesticity and even slavery. This is an activity that is a key activity that we cannot really avoid in our society. We often talk about paid care workers and unpaid care workers because actually those activities are essential to our life. And so 5 years ago with my mother, which is a nanny, we started to think about her situation and the situation of her colleagues to just find a way first to make it visible, to understand why many of workers in this field are unfortunately in precariousness and sometimes modern slavery, and how we can change the situation. So we are talking about capitalism. This domestic work is really like very symbolic actually of capitalism today. And it's an issue that is present all over the world. And so for us, this work was very interesting because we started to just have those conversations with people in different regions of the world having the same issue. And so what was very interesting was the fact that somehow we met some activists that were thinking like, okay, we should just remove this activity and because it's too close to the capitalism spirit. But in fact, it was not the answer because those people having this vocation, even though they came through this activity through very difficult path, sometimes migration path, sometimes it was a question for some women to escape maybe violences from, I don't know, their husband or someone else. So for them, it was also hope to have this opportunity to have a job and to have a job that makes sense for them because there are key workers and really providers of services to those many families. And so somehow we arrived to this kind of challenge, like how can we address this issue of maintaining an activity that is unfortunately very embedded in a domination system. And so from that we started to think about what was important, and what was very interesting was the fact that once the worker gained agency of their situation. Once they get information, once they get access to their rights, things can change. And so we started to think about that, and many of the ideas were about going through a very centralized model for this activity, like a public service, something that is more like maybe in the spirit of socialism, I will say. And it was very, it was not relevant actually, because the issue is that you need this form of decentralized relationship between the workers and the families. Like each family has its own needs, like an elder person, a child, maybe you have like some hope for someone that you care or special needs and things like that. And on the other side, the workers are not clones. They have a personality, they have a vision of their work, and so on. And this is also a part of our work to make it visible, because they have skills and they have also experience on what they are doing. So their expertise should be acknowledged. And so, like, starting to think from this issue, we understood that we needed to keep some form of decentralized organization of those workers, of this market, of this job market, actually, to make it also relevant as a quality service. Of course, there are many things that should be improved, like access to training, having also like some kind of regulation for those families that are employers and things like that. But at the end of the day, if we really want to centralize completely this economy, then we will lose the opportunity actually to provide quality services. And we know also that those workers are very sensitive to that, because it's also like making sure that they are doing the right thing for the right person. And having maybe this idea of being empowered in our job is also about that, like making sure that we have the agency to deliver what we think and are trusted to do. And so to this point, like we started to study a lot of different frameworks from the legal perspectives, but also from the organizational one. And so we end up to understand that cooperative was the only model actually that was fitting this situation. And it's very interesting because in France we have, I think, like something like 60 kind of cooperatives. So you have like so many different ways to maybe shape that. And we went through this process to organize a lot of conversation with those workers, understanding like, okay, what do they need? What is the process to take decisions? What they have in common? What is more on the individual level, and so on. And it was like, yeah, maybe there are 1,000 nannies in the community now, and we have like 100 that are very involved and 35 that have responsibilities. And it was very interesting because we often think about like people who have been dominated and maybe are in this path of seeking dignity, just need other people to just set what is good for them, and that's it. But no, we had to take the time, and it's very difficult for people who work like 50 hours a day, a week, and that have a lot of responsibility and so on. But they took this time because it was important for them, and we arrived to this model of cooperative that was very interesting because it's innovative. They have the opportunity for the first time to work with a team. They have the opportunity to value their work, their skills, and so on. And I think that when we talk about, forking capitalism, it's very important to understand this aspect of domination understand how we can remove that, but also to understand how we can preserve the opportunity for workers or users to have access to those services. So I will stop here, but it's a very quick way to help understand the process that we have been through and the opportunity that is at the end, because it's really about also social innovation actually, and governance should be really at the center and not something that is taught afterwards. And I'm very curious actually about the work of Calum, because he's explaining like all the process, and I also think that the question of the time is very important, like how trust is built between the people, how they can feel empowered to give their ideas and so on. So I really wanted to understand like how long it took you to just first think that you were forking this capitalism and then making people engage in this process.
Maybe first, I don't know to what extent we're like, I don't think we approached this project thinking we were forking capitalism. If that is an effect of it, then I think it's successful, but I think we have a long way to go before. I think it's more about carving out space for non-capitalist forms of relation and exchange. Something that we learned by doing these different experiments and has allowed us to find ways of building trust. Where like in this role-playing game at Cave, this kind of initial experiment that we talked about, where a lot of the artists didn't already know each other, we asked them to spend 36 hours playing this game together and then spend a month online deciding what to do with actual resources. With some small facilitation from us, but not really any facilitation in the terms of idea creation or creating opportunities to like actually learn about ideas as they were forming. And what we found is that for some of the more prestigious opportunities, there were very intense feelings of competition amongst the participants, such that I think it was like a relatively negative experience for people who didn't actually then get that resource. And so from this, we tried to think more about how we could minimize feelings of competition and create opportunities for the sharing of resources and for new collaborations to form. And so what we started doing is hosting workshops where we invite the participating artists to discuss their shared needs and to think about what is missing in their practices currently and what resources they currently don't have access to. And we found that this helps to establish common ground amongst practitioners. So like in the current paradigm, you're expected to go up for these increasingly competitive opportunities like grants and residencies by crafting what you write in a tone of being like something you will create in the future. Like you describe an artwork before you've even had an opportunity to make it, such that it seems like it's this impenetrable, perfect thing, when of course the development process changes a lot of things. And so what we've tried to do is just open up the idea creation process and create like a peer support environment so that people can jump onto ideas that they share and work together on things. And ultimately this has been quite successful. So we found that, yeah, establishing common ground is really an important part of any kind of like distributed decision-making process. And when I was hearing you talk, it also seemed like this establishment of a common ground is really important to the work you were doing. And I'm curious like how you approached facilitating that, or because I guess you said there's up to even 1,000 people how do they communicate with each other, or how have they built trust with each other?
Yes, it's a very challenging thing actually, and often we have the feeling that we might go faster if we had like the good tools. Actually, like most of the nannies in Paris region are like senior women with migration background, women who have left school very early. They suffer from digital divide. They might have a very nice smartphone, but in the end, they will use it only for maybe WhatsApp Messenger and texting with the kids and things like that. And they work like 50 hours a week. Sometimes I will do extra work that is not really like legal and things like that. So we have a big issue about making the space and the time so that you can build those peer-to-peer relationships. And from that, having something that is a common ground, as you said, because, and even I would say like, what we look for is having them thinking that it's their project, this is their resources, and so on. And so I think that like what was like there was like a catalytic reaction that was the fact that my mother is a nanny first, and so somehow like role modeling is helping a lot. The fact that she just quit her job, she put herself in a very vulnerable situation because, of course, like you don't have a job anymore, so how do you live? But this engagement that she was able to show to others built trust in the first time. And we are very aware that if tomorrow she's about saying like, okay, I'm quitting the project, it might be like something very difficult for the project and so on. And so from the beginning, we started to think about, okay, it's really interesting to have role modeling, but we should replicate that. We should not rely on only one person, because then you start again to centralize everything, like all the decisions should go through her, all the processes and things like that. And so we tried actually to identify other women like her in the community that were able to also be like representative of this trust. And from that, we had to work on another thing that was the fact that they have to have self-confidence. It's something that is often important in some sectors where you have this, unfortunately, domination spirit that is so high that people think that nothing is possible, I cannot take agency of my own life. And so we really had this approach of talking about skills, like hard skills, soft skills that they have, to make it very real for them, and little by little having them getting engaged, doing things, seeing the result of what they were producing, and so on. And I would say like another level also that was important to bring this common ground was really to acknowledge what was common, and from what common assets they might get some interest. And so we have two organizations, a nonprofit and a cooperative. And what was very interesting was the fact that stakeholders started to work with us quite early. We had no money, no power, no network, but it started to have this dynamic. And so we just had this analysis saying like, okay, actually there are two things that are really common. Like if they are separated, it doesn't exist. Their data, like who are they, where are they, what are they doing really, what is their life, and so on. And also their expertise, because the experience that they have is way more developed than what they have in only training. On training, you will have like the theory, but not really like the practical aspects. And so we started to really like acknowledge that in the community, and it's a lot of value for them. And then they feel like, okay, we should protect that. And even more than we had like some tentative of some organization to steal their data or things like that, you know. And so you start to build this kind of sense of community and about also having a path that is common. And I think that is taking a lot of time and also a lot of communication. And so what we try to do is really like taking any little time that they have. So we do WhatsApp groups because it's easy for them, and we have a space where we can welcome them and so on. But we really seek to amplify that because otherwise it's very difficult to keep on, you know.
I'm also just really curious in some of the more like practical and operational dimensions of the cooperative, and how do people join, and does everybody have an equal share, or like how do people gain shares in the cooperative, and if that also is something that is tied to decision-making power, or yeah, just how that's structured.
Yeah, we have this engagement ladder that makes clear for everyone, and every time we had meetings or boards or things like that, we had this opportunity to really challenge that. And so for now, at the bottom of this ladder, we consider just that you as a beneficiary of this whole system. So you have access to information, you have access to training because it's also a learning community and so on. And once you start to be willing to engage, then you go through a next level. You become an ambassador. So it means that you really cherish this project and you want to be part of it. And it might be just you give 1 hour a year, or maybe you are here every Saturdays. And it's very important to not make some kind of hierarchy that is not meaningful, because not all of them can get engaged at the same level. So we really base these stages on their will to get involved. And so some of them actually had so many responsibilities that they became employee of our nonprofit and cooperative. And then if they want, they can actually have a share in the cooperative, but they should have go through the process, because trust is then set and they know each other, and it's easier. And now that we have this cooperative, it's very funny because we have some new nannies that came through the cooperative and not from all the other process, so they're only employee, and from the same process they are like having this learning experience with the others that will enable them in 1-2 years to have a share as well and participate. And in this cooperative, actually, we have also shares for institutions like the City Hall and so on. So what we are trying to do is really like having this also this advocacy actually on the fact that what the value that they are producing is not only for them, it's also for the City Hall, it's also for the state and so on. And so what we are looking for also through this cooperative is having like a fair distribution of responsibilities also, and having this engagement of different stakeholders.
It reminds me of like a land trust model of trying to engage with a wider context and milieu where something is situated. And I think it's really amazing that you found ways of giving shares over to like local government, and yeah, so it's kind of expanding beyond just the cooperative to involve other stakeholders is something also that with Black Swan we're trying to figure out how to do.
And what are the challenges right now, and what do the community want about that?
So we're in the process of devising like our longest experiment. We want to do a year-long beta test where we recruit a number of artists in Berlin, where we're located. I don't know if I said that. And have them decide what to do with resources that have been staked by various cultural institutions. And for us, it's really important that we ask institutions to stake their resources to this artist community, and then have no decision-making power over how these resources are used. And in our experiment so far, they're pretty willing to offer something up, but at the moment, I think the biggest challenge is like money, as it often is. So while it's easy to get resources, it's hard to get like time remunerated. But yeah, that's kind of what is in store next. I think something we also haven't really put too much attention to is like the legal context. So that seems to be like a challenge to come.
A very funny challenge indeed. Yes, and I think that to finish, it's very interesting that you mentioned the fact that money is the issue, because actually when we talk about capitalism, we talk about investment often. And when we talk about those new form of economy, investment is very low. Because the understanding of the value is not very common, and so I think that there is a big work to do on that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Now we're going to take another 15-minute break, and we're going to be back at 1:30 for a conversation on art and technology. I'll see you soon.